She left me for a millionaire and texted enjoy poverty. Then doctors discovered who I really am. The moment my doctor looked at my blood work and went pale, I knew my life was over. Or so I thought. He stepped out of the room without a single word. Through the glass window of the ER, I watched him make a phone call, his hand pressed against his forehead, as if he were trying to process the impossible. 10 minutes later, 3 specialists crowded into that tiny room and stared at me like I was a ghost. Not with pity or concern, but with total, bone-chilling disbelief. My name is Nolan Webb. I'm 38 years old. 3 months ago, I was a senior structural engineer earning $218,000 a year, designing skyscrapers meant to stand for a century. But that night, I was sitting on a hospital bed in a stained gray uniform, 16 stitches deep into a hand wound from a broken light bulb. I was a janitor, mopping floors for minimum wage in the very hospital where I was now a patient. I had become invisible. I was a man whose life had been systematically dismantled by my wife, Simone, and her millionaire boyfriend, Victor Holbrook. Simone decided I wasn't ambitious enough for her taste. She traded our 15-year marriage for a tech investor with a $60 million yacht and a lifestyle she felt she deserved. They didn't just break my heart. They burned my career to the ground. Victor used his connections to blackball me from every engineering firm in the region. I watched my savings drain to nothing while Simone took the house and half of everything else. The night I started my janitor job, she sent me a photo of herself on Victor's yacht in the Caribbean. The caption was 2 words that haunted every floor I scrubbed: enjoy poverty. So, when Dr. Russell Adebayo returned with those specialists and pulled up a chair, I expected the worst. I figured I was dying. Honestly, at that point, I almost hoped for it. But then the head of genetics asked a question that felt like it came from another dimension. Mr. Webb, was your father adopted? I told her he was. George Webb was adopted as an infant in 1952. He was a simple man who worked in a steel mill, a man who believed blood was just biology and that the people who raised you were your real family. He died never knowing where he came from. The doctor nodded slowly. Then, she spoke a name that every person in Pennsylvania knows, a name synonymous with steel mills, skyscrapers, and billions of dollars. Mr. Webb, according to your genetic profile, you're the biological grandson of Elliot Thornwood. The room started spinning. Elliot Thornwood had passed away 2 months prior at the age of 94. He was worth over $9 billion. The world believed he had no living heirs, that his only son had died decades ago without children. But his son did have a child, a baby boy born in secret and given away to protect the family legacy. That baby was my father, which meant I was the sole heir to the Thornwood empire. My ears were ringing so loud I could barely hear the doctor's voices. 3 months ago, my wife told me to enjoy poverty. That night, covered in my own blood in a dingy ER, I realized that poverty was about to become a distant memory. And revenge? Revenge was about to become very, very affordable. My life used to revolve around 2 things: my career and my marriage. I poured everything I had into both. I worked late nights and weekends to hit deadlines, but I always made sure Simone felt like a priority. I took her on the vacations she dreamed of, bought her jewelry for our anniversaries, and surprised her with flowers for no reason at all. I thought I was building something permanent. I believed that if I worked hard and loved her completely, we would grow old together, just like my parents did. The first cracks appeared about 2 years before the collapse. Simone transitioned from commercial real estate to luxury properties, and her world shifted. She started attending high-end networking events and private showings for penthouses that cost more than I'd earn in a decade. She began coming home later and later, talking constantly about money and the lifestyle she felt she deserved. I noticed the change, but I convinced myself it was just a phase, professional growth, nothing more. I trusted her because I had no reason not to. I believed in our marriage the way I believed in the buildings I designed. Solid, permanent, and built to last. I couldn't have been more wrong. The night I discovered the truth, I came home early with a blinding migraine. The house was quiet, and though her car was in the driveway, she didn't answer when I called out. I headed upstairs for some medicine, and that's when I heard it, her voice coming from our bedroom. She was laughing that soft, flirtatious laugh I hadn't heard in years. I stood outside the door and listened. "He has no idea," she said into her phone. "He's so focused on his little blueprints that he doesn't notice anything. I could pack a suitcase and walk out tomorrow, and he probably wouldn't realize I was gone until his dinner got cold." My chest tightened. I pushed the door open. She was reclining on our bed in a silk robe, smiling at the person on the other end of the line. When she saw me, her face went pale for a split second before she recovered, coolly telling whoever it was that she'd call them back. "How long have you been there?" she asked. "Long enough," I replied. She didn't apologize or offer an excuse. She just sighed, looking at me like an inconvenience she'd finally grown tired of tolerating. "His name is Victor Holbrook. He's a client. We've been seeing each other for 8 months. 8 months. She said it so casually, as if she were mentioning a gym membership. My knees went weak. I had to grab the doorframe to stay upright. "Why?" was all I could manage to ask. She stood up and walked toward her closet. "Because Victor is going places, Nolan. He has $60 million. He takes me to Paris for the weekend and introduces me to people who actually matter. You take me to Applebee's and talk about concrete stress loads." I wanted to scream, but I was in total shock. For 15 years, I had loved this woman, and she was dismantling our entire life with the indifference of someone returning a sweater that didn't fit. "I want a divorce," she added. "I've already spoken to a lawyer." The next 3 months were a living hell. While Simone moved into Victor's penthouse, our lawyers fought over every scrap of my life. She wanted the house, half my retirement, and spousal support, claiming her career had suffered while supporting mine. The cruelty was breathtaking. I had been the one who supported her through every career change and late-night networking event. But the financial hit was nothing compared to what happened next. 3 weeks after the filing, I was called in the office of Richard Bowman, the CEO of my firm. Richard was a cold, powerful man who ran the company like a private kingdom. "Sit down, Nolan," he said, avoiding eye contact. "We're restructuring. Your position has been eliminated, effective immediately." I felt like I'd been punched. Eliminated? "Richard, I've been here 15 years. My reviews are flawless." He finally looked at me, and I saw the truth in his eyes. This wasn't about my work. I found out later that Victor Holbrook had investments in the construction firms that contracted with our office. He played golf with Richard every Sunday. Victor hadn't just taken my wife. He wanted to erase my existence. My severance was an insult. 8 weeks of pay for 15 years of service. I tried to find work elsewhere, but the doors were all slammed shut. A former colleague finally told me the truth over a beer. "Victor's been making calls, Nolan. He's telling everyone you're unreliable and we're fired for performance issues. You're blacklisted." Within 6 months, I went from a corner office to a 400-square-foot studio in Kensington, one of the roughest parts of Philly. My savings evaporated. I sold my watch, my golf clubs, and everything else I owned just to keep the lights on. My mother begged me to move in with her, but I couldn't bring myself to be a burden to her. "I'm fine, Mom," I lied. The only job I could get was as a night janitor at Philadelphia General Hospital, the same hospital where my mother had worked as a respected nurse for 30 years. Now, her son was a ghost in a gray uniform, scrubbing toilets for $11.50 an hour. The night Simone sent the text, I was on my knees cleaning a spill in the ER. My phone buzzed. It was a photo of her and Victor on a yacht in the Caribbean, crystal blue water stretching out behind them. She was in a bikini with a champagne glass in her hand, looking like a dream. The caption read, "Enjoy poverty." Should have been more ambitious. I stared at that screen for a long time. Something inside me cracked. Not broke, cracked. Breaking means giving up, but cracking means the pressure is finally about to shift. I didn't reply. I put the phone back in my pocket and finished mopping the floor. I went back to work because at that moment it was the only thing I could control. I had no idea that in just a few hours, the blood in my veins would change my life forever. Show up, do the job, survive another day. For 3 months, that was my only mantra. I lived in a blur of exhaustion and routine, losing 20 pounds because I couldn't afford to eat properly. I stopped calling my friends. I had nothing to say, and I couldn't bear the pity in their voices. I existed in a fog of despair that grew thicker with every passing hour. The night everything changed started like any other shift. I was in a storage room near the ER, trying to replace a stubborn, burned-out light fixture. As I twisted the bulb, the glass shattered in my grip. The pain was immediate and white-hot. Blood poured from my palm and wrist where the jagged shards had sliced deep into the tissue. I stumbled back, knocking over a shelf of supplies, and the crash brought a nurse running. She found me slumped against the wall, desperately pressing a rag to my hand while blood soaked through the fabric. Dizziness washed over me. The room began to spin. Suddenly, I was being rushed into the emergency department as a patient instead of the man who cleaned their floors. A young doctor named Russell Adebayo examined the wound and told me I'd need 16 stitches. Unlike most people who looked right through me, he had kind, professional eyes. "You've lost a good amount of blood," he said while he worked. "We're going to run some tests just to make sure everything looks okay. Standard procedure for a wound this severe." I nodded, letting him work. I figured they'd check my iron or look for an infection. Routine medical stuff. I had no idea that a simple blood test was about to unravel a secret buried for 40 years. As I waited for the results, lying there in my blood-stained janitor uniform, I thought about my father, George. He always said hard times built character. I wonder what he would think if he could see me now. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to discover things about him that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family and my place in the world. An hour later, Dr. Adebayo returned, but he wasn't alone. 2 other doctors followed him, their expressions unreadable. They stood at the foot of my bed, exchanging glances as if deciding who should break the news. "Mr. Webb, we found some anomalies in your blood work," Dr. Adebayo began cautiously. "I've asked some colleagues to consult on your case." My heart sank. I assumed the worst: cancer, leukemia, some terminal illness that would serve as the final chapter of my miserable life. Part of me felt a twisted sense of relief. At least it would be over. "Just tell me," I said. "Whatever it is, I can handle it." Dr. Adebayo shook his head. "It's not what you're thinking. This isn't about an illness. We found unusual genetic markers in your blood, markers that triggered a flag in our hospital's database." Before I could ask for clarification, the door opened again. An older woman in a white coat entered with an air of authority that made the other doctors instinctively step aside. "Mr. Webb, I'm Dr. Pauline Weaver, head of the genetics department. What we discovered in your blood work is quite extraordinary." She pulled up a chair, while the others watched me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "I need to ask about your family history. Specifically, your father. Was he adopted?" "Yes," I said, caught off guard. "He was adopted as an infant in 1952. He never knew his biological parents." Dr. Weaver nodded, as if confirming a long-held suspicion. "Did he ever try to find them?" "No. He always said the people who raise you are your real family." She was quiet for a moment, then leaned forward. "Mr. Webb, your blood contains genetic markers we have only encountered once before in our entire database. They are associated with a very specific bloodline, a family whose records have been in our system for decades due to their substantial donations to this hospital." My mouth went dry. "What family?" "The Thornwood family." The name hit me like a physical blow. Everyone in Pennsylvania knew the Thornwoods. Elliot Thornwood had built a steel empire that made him one of the wealthiest men in American history. His foundation had donated hundreds of millions to hospitals and universities. His name was on every other building in the state. Elliot had died 2 months ago at 94, leaving behind an estate worth over $9 billion. His death had dominated the news because he seemingly had no heirs. His only son, Franklin, had died in a car accident in 1985, supposedly childless. Dr. Weaver watched my face as the pieces clicked together. "Mr. Webb, according to your genetic profile, you are the biological grandson of Elliot Thornwood. Your father, George, was the illegitimate son of Franklin Thornwood. He was born in secret following an affair Franklin had with a woman on the estate, and he was given up for adoption to protect the family reputation." "That's impossible," I whispered. "My father was nobody. He worked in a steel mill his whole life. He never knew who he really was, she said softly. The records were sealed. But DNA doesn't lie. We ran the test 3 times. You are the sole surviving heir to the Thornwood estate. The weeks that followed were a hurricane of lawyers, DNA verification, and a media frenzy. The Thornwood Foundation's legal team fought me at first. They weren't ready to hand over billions to a janitor who appeared out of thin air. But the evidence was ironclad. 3 independent labs confirmed the match, and genealogists traced my father back to a Catholic orphanage that had received generous donations from the Thornwoods in 1952. After a 6-week legal battle, the court ruled in my favor. On a cold Thursday afternoon in Pittsburgh, I sat in a mahogany-lined conference room and formally accepted my inheritance, $9.4 billion. As I walked out into the winter air, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Nolan, I saw the news. Congratulations. I always believed in you. Maybe we should talk. I miss you. Simone. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just the cold emptiness where my love for her used to live. I blocked her number and put the phone away. I wasn't finished, though. 7 months ago, Simone told me to enjoy poverty. Now, it was time to send a message of my own. The first thing I did with my billions was hire a team of elite investigators and lawyers, not to protect my wealth, but to dismantle the people who had tried to destroy me. Victor Holbrook had built his fortune on a foundation of shady deals. Within 3 weeks, my team had enough evidence of insider trading and market manipulation to bury him. The game was just beginning. Victor Holbrook, the man who had whispered in ears to get me blacklisted, had left a trail of financial crimes that no one had bothered to follow until I arrived with a billion-dollar legal team. The first thing I did was acquire controlling interests in the 3 construction firms that regularly contracted with Bowman and Associates. Once the ink was dry, I made a personal phone call to Richard Bowman, the CEO who had fired me without a second thought, just to please a golf buddy. Mr. Bowman, this is Nolan Webb. You probably remember me, the engineer you terminated 7 months ago. I'm calling to inform you that Thornwood Holdings is terminating all contracts with your firm, effective immediately. I could hear his heavy breathing on the other end. He didn't say a word. I also wanted you to know, I continued, that Victor Holbrook is currently under federal investigation for securities fraud. It's information I personally provided to the authorities. I thought you should hear it from me before you read in the news. He started stammering about misunderstandings and difficult decisions, but I didn't let him finish. Goodbye, Richard. I hope you land on your feet better than I did. Within 4 months, Victor's investment fund collapsed. Between the lawsuits and federal charges, his $60 million evaporated into legal fees and settlements. The man who had stolen my wife and tried to erase my career was left with nothing but debt and disgrace. Simone had married Victor just 2 months after our divorce was finalized, trading me for what she thought was a permanent upgrade. When his empire crumbled, she found herself tied to a sinking ship. She filed for divorce from him 8 months later and eventually moved back to Ohio to live with her sister. I never spoke to her again. I realized that my silence was the most powerful message I could send. She would spend the rest of her life knowing that the man she discarded as worthless had become one of the wealthiest people in the country. That knowledge would eat at her far more than any petty words I could say. Despite the money, I refused to let it change who I was. I didn't buy a mansion or a fleet of supercars. Instead, I bought a modest 4-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood and lived simply because simplicity had taught me what truly mattered. I donated $4 billion back to the Thornwood Foundation to honor Elliot's legacy, expanding its reach into education and poverty relief. I also bought my mother, Dorothy, the cottage of her dreams near Valley Forge. Every Sunday, I go there for pot roast, and she tells me stories about my father I'd never heard before. She still cries sometimes, unable to believe how far we've come from the days I spent mopping floors just to survive. Last spring, I returned to Philadelphia General Hospital, not as a janitor, but as a benefactor. I donated $50 million to build a new wing for nursing education. We named it the Dorothy Webb Center for Nursing Excellence. When my mother saw her name on that building, she broke down in my arms. It was the proudest moment of my life. Dr. Russell Adebayo is now the head of the ER, a position partly funded by my donations. We have lunch occasionally, and he once told me he almost didn't order those extra tests the night I cut my hand. I think about that often, how a single decision by a young doctor changed the entire trajectory of my life. I've learned something in those dark months that no amount of money could ever teach. Your lowest moment is not your final moment. The night I sat on that hospital bed, I was ready to surrender. But I kept showing up. I kept putting one foot in front of the other, even when it felt pointless. My DNA didn't save me. The money didn't save me. Refusing to quit is what saved me. Simone once told me I wasn't ambitious enough. She was wrong. I wasn't ambitious for the things she valued. I was ambitious to remain a good man, even when the world gave me every reason to be bitter. My father, George, never knew he was a Thornwood, but he raised me with values no inheritance could provide. He taught me that honest work has dignity and that character is a choice you make every single day. I am Nolan Thornwood Webb. I am a billionaire, an engineer, a son, and a brother. But I am also the man who once cleaned toilets for $11.50 an hour. I am all of those things, and I am proof that your story isn't over until you decide it is. If this story moved you and reminded you that rock bottom is not the end, please hit the like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment below and let me know which part of Nolan's journey hit you the hardest. I love hearing from you. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story of resilience. Thank you for watching.